Hello and welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Lovely to be here with you on a Saturday, and thank you for sharing your weekend with us. And if this is the first time you're meeting us, hello again. And my name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I have with me my dear friend and conference co host, Tiffany Castano.
Hello, it's so nice to meet everyone or see you again here virtually. We're so excited that you're joining, and I'm CEO and founder of Zephyr. We're very excited to bring this episode 2 of our fall follow up burnout event to you.
Absolutely. And those of us that have been following our journey, you'll know that we started this conversation this year at our annual Future of Work conference back in March. And that's something that North Star Solutions and Services and Zephyr, we've been doing together for the last 3 years. And this year, our topic and our focus, very rightfully so, was on burnout, the silent pandemic, we called it. And we had a whole bunch of speakers and researchers who shared their insights and wisdom with us. And um, we got great feedback. And that's when we realized that given the nature of the topic and how it's part of our lived experience, regardless of where we come from and what we do, we needed to continue this conversation. And so this was Tiffany's idea, really, to have a fall follow-up event. And here we are in episode 2 of this 3-part series. So last month in October, we spoke with Al and Leanne Elliott, who are the hosts of the Truth, Lies, and Workplace Culture podcast, among other things. And they shared with us their model of burnout prevention and recovery. And today, continuing with the conversation, we are super excited to have author, researcher, speaker Sally Clark here with us. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, Minaki.
Welcome.
Hi, Tiffany. It's so wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Sally, I know that we have been in touch. I think it was right around the conference, and then we're so glad to have this opportunity to hear your insights. And I wanted to introduce you to the audience today. And by the way, as we get started, we'd love to hear from you where you're joining us from. So please pop it in the chat. And right now, we are live on several channels. We are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, both on Zephyr's channels and North Star's channels. So wherever you are joining us from, let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, and what's the one thing that you are looking forward to hearing today as we talk about burnout prevention and recovery. So Sally here with us, she is the co-director of Human Leaders, and she's an author, speaker, and well-being and burnout researcher. Sally works with leaders around the globe to create healthy workplace cultures and improve outcomes for individuals, teams, and the society at large. Her mission is to embed well-being at work so that burnout becomes a redundant term. Oh, how lovely is that? She also co-hosts the popular We Are Human Leaders podcast. And Sally is originally from Australia and currently lives in Amsterdam. And I've had the pleasure of hosting Sally at the North Star Cafe, where we talked about human leadership a few months ago. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights, and do let us know about the. I'm sure you're going to call out the research. There's the survey that's out there. So with all that, over to you, Sally.
Thank you so much, Minaki, for the beautiful introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to spend some time with you today, talking about a topic that's very close to my heart and an issue that impacts all of us, even if we're not in burnout right now. Burnout is something that really is pervading our society at the moment. So, Minaki, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slides, and I'll just walk through just a quick outline of what we're going to cover today. So, on the second slide, we've got a little bit of what you can expect from me today. So we're going to have a look at what burnout is. So we're going to understand a little bit about the symptoms of burnout, how we can recognize burnout. We're going to delve into what actually happens to our bodies in burnout. And we're also going to explore, what are the root causes of burnout in the workplace. Then I'm going to shift to talk about kind of the real theme of this event here today, which is really about the different ways and the different approaches we can take in terms of burnout prevention. So I'll focus first on prevention for organizations and teams, even for groups and societies through human leadership. And then I'll turn to some ways that we can, as individuals, look after ourselves and protect our spark as we go through our work lives to make sure that we're having sustainable careers and that we're able to be in a position where we can help others to prevent burnout as well and have the impact that we want to. I would encourage anyone, if you have questions, if you have thoughts as I'm going through, please just throw them in the chat, and I'd ask Tiffany or Meenakshi if you'd like to share them with me so we can sort of have a bit of a conversation as we go along. Now, before I delve into the definition of burnout, I wanted to share this photo of myself with you. This photo was taken in January 2009, and it really embodies how I was feeling at the time. I was in a deep state of overwhelm. I was working as a finance lawyer at one of Europe's top firms, and to the outside world, it looked like I had made it. I was in a role that Oxford and Cambridge graduates vie for. My business card basically said success. And it was an incredibly prestigious role, and I felt really thrilled to have it. However, on the inside, I was completely miserable. I was completely exhausted. I was working 70 to 80-hour weeks. I was experiencing stress rashes. I was getting headaches, having trouble sleeping, losing weight, and just generally starting to feel disconnected from myself. But because of the prestige of this role, the importance that it seems to hold in society, I persisted. So a few months after this photo was taken, it was a Friday night, and I was flying from Amsterdam to a small town in France where my brother was doing a postdoctorate at the time. And I don't remember anything about that flight, but I remember arriving at Nantes airport, walking into the arrivals hall, laying eyes on my brother, and collapsing to the ground. I started crying, and I couldn't stop. And it's only really in the months afterwards that I started to realize that I had been through a burnout. And it even took me years to acknowledge and give that term to what I'd been through, even though in retrospect, it is very clear that that's what had happened. And that's because there is still a lot of shame associated with burnout. I had the feeling at the time that everyone else seemed to be coping fine. There must be something wrong with me. And it's because of this perception of burnout as some kind of weakness or failure that so many of us struggle alone for too long and keep going and pushing and willing things to be better, even when things absolutely are not. So eventually, years after this experience, I started to get curious about what I'd been through, and I wanted to understand more deeply what burnout actually is, what had happened to me, and why it had happened. So coincidentally, actually, around the time that I started that research, the World Health Organization for the first time defined burnout. And this is a slightly abbreviated version of its definition. Burnout is a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress. It has 3 dimensions: exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy. So let's just take a sec to break down this definition. So the World Health Organization identifies the cause of burnout as being chronic workplace stress. So stress is a response that we have in our body to triggering events. Chronic means that it's low level and ongoing, which can make it quite difficult to identify. It becomes insidious. And workplace means that burnout is something that occurs in our work environment. Now, there's quite a lot of debate around this particular aspect of burnout because we're not silos. We can't very easily separate, our work selves, certainly since remote and hybrid work has become so prevalent. But I think what the idea here is to really to shine a light on the incredible amount of stress that we do experience in our work lives, whether we're entrepreneurs, whether we're students, whether we're carers. Burnout really is a very impactful experience for all of us and really does have that fundamental connection with work. Now, as a researcher, we use these 3 dimensions to measure whether people are indeed experiencing burnout. And exhaustion tends to be the most prominent of the dimensions. Basically feeling just world-class levels of exhaustion and tiredness, almost feeling like you can barely get out of bed and go on with things. It's really quite pervasive mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. Cynicism speaks to this sense of almost withdrawal from life. It can sometimes almost have a bit of an existential flavor to it. So we withdraw from our work. We maybe don't care as much anymore. We may also withdraw from other relationships, from other things that we once derived a lot of joy from in life. So that sense of almost pulling back from work and life more broadly. And reduced professional efficacy is a fancy way of saying we just can't do as much as we could anymore, or at the rate that we are used to. And this can be a really tricky one for those of us who are high achievers, and many people who experience burnout are very intelligent people who are incredibly capable and have kind of gotten away for years with doing way too much. So when we're used to these kind of long nights and achieving things, hitting deadlines, and our ego becomes quite attached to that, when we start to see our performance slide, it can feel very, again, existential. Who am I if I can't do all of these things and keep producing at this rate? So that's the World Health Organization definition of burnout. What might we sort of expect to see when we're going through burnout? What are some of the symptoms we might see in ourselves or in others? Now, unfortunately, burnout is, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but burnout is something that is very individual. So how one individual may experience burnout may look incredibly different to how another person will. And some people may have a number of these symptoms and not be in burnout. Another person might have none of these symptoms and be experiencing burnout. It's very, very personal. But to give you a bit of a sense, and burnout often can sort of start by, we start to feel quite wired or hyper alert. This is sort of early in our stress response. We're having adrenaline bursts. And I certainly recall this as a finance lawyer, feeling like I was on fire. I'm smashing things. I'm on top of everything. I'm delivering to, and that's a great observation from the audience, that the reduced professional efficacy that also leads to a lack of self-worth. That's absolutely was my experience. So we're really on that sort of adrenaline high, and that can feel potentially almost addictive. We really want to stay in that state where we're really, crossing our boundaries and achieving a lot. It's simply not sustainable. When we stay in that state, eventually we start to struggle to relax. We might find it difficult to let go and unwind. We stay sort of stuck in that state of high alert. This can then spill into sleep issues, whether it's difficulty getting to sleep or difficulty staying asleep, maybe waking up really early, grabbing our phones, feeling that deep sense of urgency around work. Some of us can start to use more coffee, perhaps sleeping pills and other substances to facilitate this awakeness and awareness and connection to work, to be able to keep performing. And I'm as big a coffee fan as the next person, don't get me wrong. But when we start to be leaning on our caffeine a little bit more heavily, this can be a sign. Burnout, because of its impact on our physiology, will actually start to compromise our immune system at a certain point, which means we may find ourselves becoming sick more often and taking longer to heal from sickness. We may become preoccupied with work. And to some extent, there is an aspect of work, of normalization of preoccupation with work in our society. We are all hustling, we're all busy. I think particularly for entrepreneurs, but really for all of us who care about what we do, it can be very difficult to untangle what is a healthy commitment to delivering in our work and being, on top of what we're doing, and actually starting to become almost a bit of an obsession. And that's something that I certainly experienced, where I would prioritize my work above everything else, including social activities, holidays, and my personal relationships. I definitely experienced this next symptom, irrational anger, heightened irritation, and mood swings. I was not at my best. And it's those kind of little outbursts that particularly might feel like they're not actually who we are, but we're so tired, we simply don't have the space or the energy to stay in that sort of calm, non-reactive space. Eventually, burnout can actually impact our prefrontal cortex. And this leads to issues like forgetfulness, brain fog, loss of focus and concentration. We may find we're starting to make mistakes, and we may find that we're really used to being the one who pulls bits of information together, who has the answers in meetings. And when that starts to slide, that definitely can impact not only our professional efficacy, but as mentioned, start to hit our self-worth as well. Eventually, we can feel very low in energy, and just even the things that used to bring us joy just won't have the same effect anymore. We may become detached and withdraw, and this can even become a bit of a vicious cycle because we withdraw from others, and so we feel more detached, we feel more withdrawn, and so we just sort of keep taking those steps back away from others. For me at the time, I would sometimes describe it as like living through glass. I wasn't fully participating in my life. And eventually, total exhaustion may hit. It doesn't for everyone, but it can get to the point where it's not only is exhaustion pervasive, but it's almost normalized. We may even almost forget how it feels to feel genuinely energized in our work and beyond. And I just wanted to take a moment for reflection. I'm wondering if you take a moment and you look at those symptoms, whether you have experienced one or more of these in the last 6 months. And I certainly raise my hand as having experienced it. And if I'm candid, I have been experiencing some spots of chronic stress recently, and it's certainly an interesting one to be someone who works in the space of burnout every day and to still notice myself succumbing to it. And this again really speaks to that quite insidious character that burnout can have. It can really be quite sneaky, and before we know it, it's right there. So,
Sally, sorry, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So one is, yes, I totally with you in this. There are so many things on this slide that I'm like, yeah, I've experienced that and I'm going through that. Just wanted to call out a couple of things also. There's a lot of great comments in the chat. Some of them are not showing up here. So I also wanted to take a moment to welcome folks. And I know there's a couple of folks here who have joined us from the West Coast. So it's really early their time. Thank you for making the time. And we have some great comments here. And there's one that I wanted to call out, Sajid, who says, without the ability to set and maintain boundaries by saying no, individuals may feel overwhelmed, overcommitted, resentful, leading to stress and anxiety. And then he also adds that there is a need to call out the toxic environment at workplaces.
Fantastic comment. I think those are two really key points. I've talked to quite a few people recently for an upcoming article on burnout, and the word boundaries was actually the most prevalent. I did a little word cloud to see which word came out most often. And that was one of the biggest lessons that people experience going through burnout, is not having set boundaries. And I think to go a little deeper there, often, and certainly for me, I wasn't even aware that I wasn't setting boundaries. I'd never really done the work to be able to understand that I needed to. The really sort of almost exploitative environment of the law firm where I was working, it was so normalized that everyone just gave all of themselves. And so I think that's a really great point, that, really becoming very aware of our boundaries and acting in accordance with them is a really profound observation. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, absolutely. And more comments here. Alex, thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing your reflections. Lakshmi. And that's a great point about values.
Yeah, look, I'll delve into this a little more deeply when we shift to looking at burnout prevention. But it's one of the key aspects of burnout prevention is knowing ourselves more deeply through understanding what matters to us and what our values are. So I'm excited that someone's flagged that already, because we'll be coming back to that very soon.
Back to you, Sally. Thank you.
Thanks, Meenakshi. So just very briefly, to give a little bit of an understanding and some context to some of those symptoms that we just looked at. In very simple terms, when we experience stress, our sympathetic nervous system is engaged. So this is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. We feel alert, we feel that sense of there's a hormonal response, we're ready to deal with whatever is causing us stress. So from an evolutionary perspective, this might have been a saber-toothed tiger or something chasing us. We want to get away from the tiger, so we engage our nervous system. We run, we hopefully don't get eaten. And that's when, once we're safe, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. So this is the rest and digest state. And it's actually so beautifully designed to harmonize our body, to actually heal the micro damage that stress causes, bringing our body back to a state of equilibrium so that we're ready to deal with the next stressor that we may encounter. Now, when we're in burnout, when we're in that chronic state of stress, we become somewhat stuck in the sympathetic nervous system response. This means that our body is constantly in this slightly, tense state of alert, and there's all kinds of physiological consequences of that. But because our bodies aren't designed to sustain that for long, eventually that really does start to wear us down, and that's where we see the impact on immune system, prefrontal cortex, and simply the wearing down of our body. And speaking for myself, I think there were quite a lot of signals, symptoms, red flags that I was simply ignoring and overlooking. My body was desperately trying to send me signals to stop, to slow down, to care for myself. And it was only when I collapsed that I started to listen. So it was really awesome, and very conveniently for me that the World Health Organization defined burnout just as I was starting to do my research and write my books around burnout. But it also got me thinking, because the World Health Organization, as we just saw, defined burnout as being caused by chronic workplace stress. So what causes chronic workplace stress? I delved deep into the research, and I was actually quite shocked, reassured, but shocked to find that burnout is not the individual's fault. And if there's nothing else that you take from our time together today, I'd really love you to keep this in mind. Burnout is not a result of personal weakness or failure. It's not from not trying hard enough, not being strong enough. Burnout tends to happen most predominantly to high performers, people who are highly intelligent and highly capable and simply give too much. So delving deeper into my research, I identified 3 forms of unhealthy work cultures that lead to burnout. I'm just going to briefly walk you through them. I could talk for hours, but I'll try and keep it a little succinct for us today. So the organizational toxic work culture is obviously something that we see a lot, written about. There's a lot of research that's gone into it. Even the leading burnout researchers, Maslach and Leiter, have identified 6 different causes of organizational, toxic culture that can cause people to burn out. So these are really things that are a lot to do with behavioral attributes that we see in the workplace, whether it's poor leadership, having too much to do, being under-resourced, poor communication, and also issues like bullying. But burnout doesn't just happen to people who work in organizations. As I mentioned, it can happen to entrepreneurs, PhD students, people who are carers. And that's because at the societal level, we have a little bit of an unhealthy narrative around work. And I'm not saying things were necessarily better in the past, but if we look back over sort of 50, 60 years ago, people had broader senses of their identity. So there may have been more religion, more community activities, sports activities. We've really reached a place where, for a lot of us, work is a very predominant source of our sense of identity and our sense of self-worth. We have this pervasive hustle culture around the world. And the way we talk about work, the way we even respond to the question, how are you, with busy, it's this very normalized idea that work can and should take up almost all of our lives. And we're not born thinking, I need to get the corner office, I need to be CEO, I need to achieve all of these incredible things in order to have worth. So because we're raised in an environment in which this toxicity exists, we breathe it in and we start to take on these beliefs. And this can often be seeded by very well-intended ideas. And I know, my parents my father grew up in poverty and in a great deal of struggle. many years ago now. But because of that, the pressure that he put on my brother and I to achieve, I believe was well intended, but it certainly gave me the message that I had to achieve. And that, for example, that prestigious role at a law firm was simply too valuable for me to give up and do something that was more aligned with who I authentically am. So those 3 levels means that there's sort of the organizational component, the air that you breathe in, as it were, at work. Society is at whole, so that the conversations and the narratives that we have at a societal level around what work means and how we derive our value. And then this internalized layer, which can cause us, for example, to cross our boundaries and to not listen to those signals that our body is sending us. So I'd love to sort of pivot now a little bit to talking about the 2 approaches that I believe are very important for us to take when it comes to burnout prevention. So I've called it a holistic approach in the title of this session together today. I believe that we need to really have an and approach when it comes to burnout prevention. What I love about working in this space is there are many people who are working at both levels, and it's really exciting to see the increased focus on these 2 approaches, I think, to changing how we think and talk about work, and also our own self-awareness and our own behaviors, so that we can work together to shape healthier work cultures. So human leadership is a framework that is really about evolving as individuals and as a collective so that we can thrive through work. So Alexis, my co-director at Human Leaders, and I have worked extensively to really develop a data-driven framework that we bring to organizations. And it has 3 pillars which we bring to organizations, to teams, to individuals. So I'll walk you through them very quickly. The first is self-leadership. And this is really about doing that work of understanding ourselves so that we can behave and lead with greater authenticity. So this is about doing the continuous work of understanding yourself more deeply. And I honestly believe it's a lifelong journey. It never ends. So that we can actively move towards future vision with authenticity. So there are 3 aspects of self-leadership. Internal self-awareness, so really doing that work to understand who we are at a fundamental level, what matters to us. There's emotional wisdom, so being able to stay attuned to and aware of emotions, allowing our emotions to be a part of our lives rather than avoiding them or bottling them up. And the third is empowered agency, so having a really clear understanding of what we have control over and what we don't. And I have to say, this is one that just resonates so deeply when we do this work in organizations, because so often I think our brains automatically, subconsciously just just keep churning about all these things that actually are beyond our control. So when we can start to shed some light on what is beyond our control and release that and let it go and focus on what we can actually control, it's a very empowering shift to make. And the second pillar of human leadership is leading others. So this is really when we start to go beyond ourselves and connect with others. So it's about building the skills to nurture strong, healthy interpersonal connections so we can foster safe, innovative work environments. And I would argue even beyond work. So we're talking also about the relationships that we have with friends and family as well. So I spoke a moment ago about the internal self-awareness, which is a component of self-leadership. When we're leading others, we also want to become aware of our external self-awareness. So this is really about making sure that our intention matches our impact. So often we have ideas about what we're doing and we think, oh, this is landing for other people. But it's really about starting to get the feedback and gather some data from people around us to make sure that we really are behaving in alignment. The second component is mindful communication. So, there's so much communication in how we work. There's so many different channels. There's so many different ways of communicating. And this has also shifted in the last few years with an increase in remote and hybrid work. So really taking the time to make sure that what we're saying and how we're saying it is as mindful as possible to reduce the chances of miscommunication and to also build a stronger sense of connection and belonging. And this leads into cultivating connection. So really leading with a focus on holding space for others, so that the outcome is that people feel seen and heard. This is something we don't often talk about in the work context, but I think as a basic psychological human need, it's something that we as leaders can bring. And when we do, it really has a transformative impact on culture. And finally, radical responsibility. So taking complete ownership for how you live and lead, holding yourself accountable, prioritizing your well-being, and staying actively open to learning and growing. And this is, there's a little bit of a fierceness here. It makes me think of Kristen Neff's fierce self-compassion research, which is around this active nature, this active steps that we can take to really look after ourselves, to hold ourselves accountable, and to step up and keep doing that daily work that we need to do of the lifelong journey of evolving, growing, and connecting as humans and as leaders. So this is our framework for kind of starting to shift some of the organizational cultural aspects that drive burnout. And again, I really do believe that it's something we talk about these things in the work context, but they have a flow-on effect through our lives. So it also then impacts how we are as a society, how we're talking with our friends about work, starting to bring more awareness to those pervading narratives. So the question I think that every time I speak on burnout and I speak to human leadership, a lot of people love the framework, very excited. But we also need to, I think, take a step back first almost and think about what can I do as an individual to make sure that I'm not sliding into burnout? Because in order to be great leaders, we need to not be under chronic stress. We need to be looking after ourselves. So these are the three, again, based on my research, the three aspects of burnout prevention as individuals. We start with self-compassion, and this is really the foundational level. Self-compassion means believing at a deep level that you have intrinsic value just as you are, that you are worthy just for existing. It doesn't depend on your job title, on how much you work, or on anything else external to you. It's a very fierce self-compassion from within, that you have value just as you are right now. The second layer is then self-knowledge. And as we flagged earlier, so it's really about understanding at a deep level who you are, what makes you unique, what really matters to you. And this can be really helpful to do exercises around getting clear on your values and understanding, who you are and what motivates you. That's work that I honestly had never done until I went through burnout. And it was so impactful to be able to go through that process of actually learning who I truly was, because then we can start to make decisions that align with our true self. And this can help us very powerfully track towards well-being and away from burnout. The final component is self-awareness. And I kind of see self-awareness as it's a daily habitual practice. Again, it's not a switch that we can flick and suddenly we're self-aware, if only. It's an ongoing lifelong journey of doing the things that support us to stay grounded, to be able to listen to the signals that our body is sending us. So it's really tuning in with honesty to when we're feeling tired and when we maybe need to take our foot off the gas pedal, those kind of signals. And it's, it's not always fun. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable to have to rest, to do the right thing, to do something that's actually going to benefit us in the long term. But it's really with having that fierce self-compassion, knowing ourselves, and then also bringing self-awareness that we can create a burnout-free life and empower ourselves to make the right decisions for ourselves. So this the final slide is kind of a little bit around, yay, fellas, this self-compassion is, I almost feel a fire inside when I talk about it. There's a real kind of, it's good stuff. So this is a framework that I use to speak to people about burnout recovery. So, but I also believe that it has a great impact on us from a personal burnout prevention perspective. So take the word burnout, remove the vowels, and we are left with BRNT. And these are sort of practices really of self-awareness that can help us ground in ourselves and really keep that open, honest dialogue with our bodies so that we're listening to those signals and acting on them. So by breathe, I mean really connecting with either our breath, maybe through movement, really starting to build that relationship with our physical body. And this is something that, I really hadn't done until I'd been through burnout. I remember a therapist asking me, and, where do you feel that in your body? And I felt like I was cut off from here. I was a human who was a brain, and I didn't have that sense of connection with my physical body. Through our breath, we can start to also engage the parasympathetic nervous system. So every time we exhale, and you might want to just take a deep breath right now to experience it. Take a deep breath in, and then a really long breath out. Breathe all the way out. So as you exhale, you engage your parasympathetic nervous system. Unfortunately, one exhale is not going to solve burnout, but by starting to really bring breathing practices into our daily lives, we can connect with that relaxing power that the breath has. The second component is rest. And this has a couple of different aspects. One is sort of throughout the day, making sure that you are not just staring at a screen continuously for 10 hours a day. So going for a quick walk, getting up and jumping up and down for a bit, doing something that will get you out of your seat and giving yourself a break from work, even when it feels very compelling to maybe work through lunch break and, tick off a few more things on your to-do list. I cannot count the number of times where I haven't really wanted to take a break, but then I have, and then I've had an idea while I've been out walking that's actually solved something huge. Rest also entails turning off, so disconnecting from devices, disconnecting from work in the evenings and on weekends. So really starting to guard those boundaries. This is also interconnected with work culture as well, because it's one thing for us to set these boundaries. We also ideally need to be in an organizational or work environment where those boundaries are encouraged and also supported by our managers and our teams as well. And rest also means holidays and, taking some time off on vacation to get away from work. Again, the perspective and insight that you can gather from having that rest, having that disconnection is immense. And it's very important also for our bodies. I have a fundamental belief that rest shouldn't be something that we do just on weekends or just on vacations. Rest should actually be built into how we work so that we don't need to recover from Friday through to Sunday. So really making sure ideally that when you hit vacation, you're not having to sort of recover from it for a few days before you can actually enjoy yourself. The third, and this is kind of my favorite one, nourish. So we tend to think of nourish in terms of what we eat and what we drink. But for me, nourishment is really about everything that we consume. So this, of course, includes our food and what we drink, but it also includes the environment that we live in, the people that we surround ourselves with, the information we put in our minds. So nourishing is about being very mindful and, again, a little bit fierce about what we expose ourselves to in terms of information. This, I find, something that I have to be very vigilant about. And it is, as we all know at the moment, there is a lot of information. There's a lot of things going on around us that are heartbreaking. So having the ability to be gentle with ourselves and not overexposing ourselves to things that will just, beyond our control, out of our agency, and really allowing ourselves to say no and to switch off the phone, to put down the social media when we need to. Again, that does take some fierce energy. And finally, and I think this is in burnout recovery, the most important starting point, but it's also one that's incredibly important for burnout prevention, and that is to talk, to connect. We often believe that we have to do things by ourselves. There's so much narrative in our society about being, self-made and coping by ourselves and not burdening others. Everyone else has their own problems. I don't want to be a burden. And yet social connections and having safe places, safe people to go to share what we're going through, good or not so good, is essential to human psychological well-being. I'm a bit of a therapy pusher. I love therapy. I love coaching. So I think it's really helpful if you do have access to these professional means of support, please engage them sooner rather than later. And also really, allowing time and nourishing that energy with your friends and with your family so that you can be your authentic self and have that moment of reflection when things aren't going so well. Again, in full candor, I had a conversation earlier today with a girlfriend because I've just been feeling a bit flat, and it felt so good to do something that I certainly know pre-burnout I would have swallowed down and I would have tried to cope by myself. And yet, being able to talk about things it's a fundamental human need. And I think we really undervalue that in our society. So this has been quite a sprint through burnout, through human leadership, and through the sort of the self-care practices that we can use to prevent burnout at an individual level too. I'd just love to reiterate this idea that there is an and approach required to burnout. Those of us who aren't in burnout, we can work together to create healthier workplaces, to be more vulnerable, to build our skills of communication and connection, and to create environments where people can actually thrive through their work and feel that sense of authentic expression through their work. I'm not saying it's always going to be a party and easy. Work will often be challenging because we need it to be sometimes too. But taking that sort of cultural approach alongside the fierce and vigilant work we can do at an individual level to love ourselves, to hold ourselves with compassion, to know ourselves, and to tune into that self-awareness, even when it's uncomfortable, and listen to those signals that our body and our emotions are sending us. Thank you so much for listening to me rattle on about burnout. I would love to answer any questions or hear any thoughts from you.
Wow, Sally. There's so much great stuff going on in the comments as well. And just again, thank you for joining us and sharing all this information and making it so human. And I especially love this call out about never being alone, and just the reflections that everyone and vulnerability that they're sharing in the comments. I love what Jeffrey Knight said about we can't control. So it falls into the category of stop doing that, which is oversimplified. But the sooner we adopt that mindset, the better off we are. And just all the things that even Lakshmi's sharing, really, she loved the make our intention match our impact. And that really, thank you for that too, Lakshmi, because that hit home. I talk so much about intention versus impact. And we, in society, you talked to us, Sally, about societal impacts, and there's so much pressure about, well, I didn't mean that. That's not what I meant, right? But we have to own that, and it's back to the self-awareness piece. So I'm just loving that folks have joined and all that you shared. Even thanks for pulling that up too, Meenakshi. Personal affirmation, sustaining energy throughout the day. We don't have to burn throughout the day, and saying no is so important, but we get pressured. And it's similar to the story you shared where we want to climb the ladder. We want our business card to reflect success. And so we don't say no, and we push ourselves and we push those feelings down when we know we should be resting.
It's a really difficult one. I think we're also very conditioned to, and I speak for myself, I've been an entrepreneur now for 13 years, and it is really hard sometimes to trust. I think when we're feeling like I have to say yes to everything because I don't know how things are going to look in 6 or 12 months from now, it makes a lot of sense. It's very understandable that we say yes and we overcommit. And yet I think it does take, it's an ongoing journey as well of starting to learn to trust that it will be okay. And that if we want to be able to do the work we want to do in 12 months, we may have to say no now so that we will be in a physical, emotional, and mental space to still be doing, having the energy we need to in 12 months. It really is about playing the long game, which is countercultural. It's a bit of a revolution, really, but it really is how we have to approach things, I think, in order to avoid burnout and to stay as authentic and aligned as we can with our true selves.
Yeah. This has been fantastic. I've been making notes and also looking at all the wonderful comments here, and there are so many thoughts that have come up for me, Sally, as I've heard your talk, and a few things that you called out. The countercultural piece, absolutely, and that's where I was reminded of the late Sir Ken Robinson's work in the space of reform on education systems around the world, and he so eloquently called out the dangers of industrialization of the education systems around the world, and exactly what you said, and he talks about it. He has at least 2 different TED talks out there. So, folks, if you haven't looked it up, please do.
Amazing stuff.
Yes, it's absolutely revolutionary. So one of the things he talks about is, as children, as we grow older, we start living in our heads more and more. So if you think about it, as young children, kids are running around, and we want them to do that, right? And I don't remember where I read this, but I remember this. It makes me laugh, but it's a sad truth that as a child, you want your child to run about and talk, and once they hit school, you want them to shut up and sit down.
It's such a great point, Meenakshi, as well. And I think it's something where we're so conditioned to this kind of seriousness, this lack of play that we have as adults. And I was at a museum here in Amsterdam last week, and there was this awesome, huge graffiti piece that was like little cartoon characters. And my initial response was like, I just giggled. And then I looked at the sign next to it, and the artist had actually said, my work seeks to elicit a playful, childlike response from people. I want people to feel that, like, when I see it. And, even just doing that right now, I feel like, oh, that's unprofessional. But
isn't it?
Can we not just hold a little bit more space for that?
Yeah. And one of the things Sir Ken talked about in his first TED talk is like he was he said it in his beautiful storytelling, jovial manner, but it's such a hard truth. He said most academics, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, he said it's if you look at most academics, he said they seem to use their bodies as a transport mechanism to carry their heads to meetings. And everything that you talked about today about being connected to our bodies and listening to our bodies, using breath. And Tiffany, that reminded me, I'm sure it did to you as well, of Angelina's work that you did,
Absolutely.
the workshop on breathwork that you did in the conference.
So powerful.
Yeah. So and our education systems and all the social conditioning that we have, it's leading us away from that sense of connection with our bodies and with nature, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that came up for me as you were sharing, Sally, is this quote by Lao Tzu that says, "Nature never hurries, yet everything is accomplished." And that goes back to the trust in the universe and in a system. And it sounds, a lot of us, we think it's sort of frou-frou, it's out there, but it's really, there's so much truth in this. And when you talked about your experiences as an entrepreneur in 13 years, wow, congratulations. I mean, Tiffany and I, we are kind of, around the 3-4 year mark. And we talk about this all the time. It's like, you never know, as you're responsible for bringing in the business. It's so hard not to care for yourself in the process.
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing that, Meenakshi, because I do think that, and sometimes I get annoyed at myself for being this way, but I feel like sometimes I call these experiences into my life, like, for example, choosing to become an entrepreneur, which is really, really hard sometimes. And it's forced me, in order to be able to do this in a sustainable way, it has forced me to love myself more and to build in healthy habits, to set boundaries, to do things that are quite uncomfortable for me historically. And, I really, in my books, I write also about this, as you were speaking to, the ways that the societal sort of aspects of toxic work culture are manifest. And certainly one of them is our education systems and the complete focus on work and on, making sure you're doing something that's going to earn you a certain level of money. And it's even down to some of the legislation and the laws that we have around work and how we treat people in that context. So I think it's really interesting. My heart sings every time I hear about things like meditation and yoga practices and anything that really helps us know ourselves more for children, because I had studied two university degrees to become a lawyer, and at no point was I ever asked what matters to you, who are you authentically. And I think if we can start to have those conversations with younger people, we can start to really shift the narrative on work and make it something that is much more nourishing to us.
Yes, absolutely. There's there's a couple of comments here. Lakshmi, a quote from Adam Grant: "Who do you want to be? What can you do to be that person?"
I love that. That reminds me too. There's a quote that I've recently that's come into my life that I've loved, and it's by Charles Bukowski, and it's "Who were you before the world told you who you should be?" And it again speaks to all of those constructs of society and the workplace, and all the things that don't allow us to pour into ourselves. And the other reflection I've had since we've been talking is one thing that I've gifted myself through burnout in this almost 4-year entrepreneurship journey is to trust the process. So for me, it's 3-pronged. It's trust yourself, that self-awareness, that self-love, pouring into ourselves, trust the process, and making sure that we have all the things we typically have, what we need. We just are always reaching for more because we're told that we have to do more. And then it's trust others. We're never alone on this journey.
What
Love
a beautiful,
that. Yeah.
such a beautiful message, Tiffany. And I love that those are the lessons you're taking through this journey for yourself. And I think it is something that is, again, there's almost something a bit countercultural and revolutionary about that. We're taught not to trust. We get a lot of messaging that makes us quite insecure, and I won't go into my full rant about that. but I think it is an act of almost of courageous rebellion to be able to say, no, I'm not going to play that game. I'm actually just going to trust. And immediately, even as we're talking about that, I can feel at a physiological level my body relax. I'm not clinging on like this anymore. I'm holding space for things to be. And I think that shift is something that it's countercultural, but it's such a powerful one to make. And it's thrilling to make it with other people as well, to know we're not alone in doing this work.
So beautiful.
The last thing that you said, Sally, it really brought up the need and the importance of community. So it struck me just now that when we talk about building community and when we do get together, more often than not, it is centered around accomplishment and achievement and doing more. Like we'll have professional networking groups, all of these social groups that we make in the professional world are more directed around harnessing the collective to do more. And what you just said, when you said, being able to do this with others, how nice it would be if we had, communities, if we built communities that also focused on slowing down.
Absolutely. I think it's a really profound point, Meenakshi. And it's one of the reasons when I quit law, I became a yoga teacher. And I kind of used to tell the joke that it's like every other lawyer in her mid-30s, because it was a bit of a thing. It's like we do this we run 180 degrees in the opposite direction. But it's partly also finding, it was for me a process of trying to find community, trying to find souls with whom I resonated, that wanted more than just those achievements. And I come from a lot of privilege, and I'm really grateful for my education and for everything that's brought me to this moment, to this conversation with you today. And I think it's something where we need to do, because again, if we allow the world to just operate, we will be pulled apart, we'll be individualized, we'll lose connection with one another. And again, it is this almost rebellious act of seeking connection, of namaste, I see, the light in me sees and honors the light in you. It's that deeper connection that I think that's really, to a large extent, what being a human is about. And if we do that as leaders, as human leaders, then our impact will be so much more profound than simply boosting productivity.
Yes, so true. There's so much to unpack there. Like even the language that we use, right? I mean, all of this is rooted in the industrial era, where it's all about what can we and even the term human resources, right? And especially especially in the I come from the software development, product development world, and it's not uncommon for us to use the term resources when we mean
Yeah.
people, especially in the outsourcing world,
Mhm.
for example, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole thing around that. Yeah, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I know I could again talk for hours with you both and with this group about this. In my books, I argue against the use of the term human capital because it really encourages us, I think, to see people almost as pens. When the ink runs out, we throw it out and we grab a new one. And humans simply are not resources or capital in that same definition. And we need to, I think it's, I'm probably, as a former lawyer, I'm a bit of a word nerd, so I get really kind of into the granularity of what our language means. But I think we really need to be speaking about people, as living, breathing, incredible beings, and not as this tool to be exploited.
Yep. It's all about, it's so utilitarian when you get into that.
Mhm.
And that, to me, that also drives a lot of our personal need for doing more, for accomplishments and for achievement. And then we get into that vicious cycle of then feeling burned out, then feeling
And
less than.
that feeling of never enough, which I think you also touched on, Tiffany, as well, that is so easy to kind of become stuck in, of this always reaching, there's always a gap. We're never, we find it really challenging to simply be satisfied, abiding in the moment as we are now. And yet, without getting too philosophical, the present moment is the only reality that there is. The more we can ground ourselves in it and find that, again, that sense of ease rather than willing things to be different, I think the more, the better leaders we become, the better humans we are too.
Absolutely. There are a few more comments here, and as we begin to wrap up our conversation today, we'd love to hear from everyone here that's still live with us here. Please chime in the chat. What is the one big thing you're taking away today from our conversation? So if you're still watching and listening and you can type, then please let us know. Add a comment to let us know what is the one thing you're taking from today's conversation.
And those of you on replay, we're not letting you off either. I know some of you couldn't make it, so we would love to hear when you get an opportunity to watch, because there's so much to unpack. So share that with us too.
Absolutely. And yes, and how could we forget to mention this? So Lakshmi actually was one of our panelists at the conference in March, and she and her co-host Anjali, and the three of us are, by the way, meeting for a talk today later this evening. Yeah, so they are co-hosts of this community called Hit Refresh. And that's the link to join them. So they join midweek Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern. It's an open to anyone community, and they do a half an hour sort of hit refresh, and that's what the community does. And I've joined them a few times. It's absolutely fantastic.
Same.
Yeah,
I hope to be there this week, but it didn't work out. But it's a great community, and just such amazing things happen there. But you will leave refreshed.
Absolutely. Hey, Andrea, thank you for joining us live and being on till now. So key takeaway, it's okay to be not okay.
So important. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
I think it's something that we really need to remind ourselves of time and again, that it's okay to not be okay. And we also empower others when we can say, actually, I'm not fine, I'm struggling. We also make that okay for others around us. And it's this is the full spectrum of the human experience. And so I really appreciate that comment.
Absolutely. And the self-leadership is something that I'm very passionate about. And for me, it's always about, yes, there are systemic challenges, but my logic is that in each of us as individuals is who form the system. And whilst there are things that are systemic and outside of our control, focusing on what is in our control, like Jeffrey pointed out earlier, of keep away from what is not in your control, but then the things that you are in your control. And I think really, for me, the three basic leadership principles are leading from where you are. It doesn't matter. You don't have to wait for a title or whatever it is. And leading self before leading others. And I love that, seeing that in your model, Sally. And again, lead with your whole self, lead with your head, heart, and hands. And it needs the alignment between your values, your thoughts, and your actions. That's what really makes it, right? So I was reminded of that, as that's one of, so those are some of my takeaways really around slowing down, listening to your body, and then sort of being in touch with your whole self. So thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight to join with you in the group, and thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sally.
Yeah. So that's it, folks, for today. Sally, once again, thank you so much for your time. I can't believe it's already a few minutes over the hour.
We could have talked for hours more.
Sally, before we let you go, what's the best way folks can reach you?
Please come find me on LinkedIn and learn more about human leaders at wearehumanleaders.com.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And folks, so this was episode 2 of our 3-part series. So join us back on the first Saturday in December. That is December 2nd. And Tiffany and I will round us off in our fall follow-up event. So we're going to share some of the more, continue this conversation and share some techniques and strategies that you can use going into 2024. And we'll also be doing a recap of our conference from March and also the 2 conversations that we've had. Last month, we met with Leanne and Al Elliott, as we said earlier, and then today's conversation with Sally. So we'll be sort of summarizing those and then sharing some of our own techniques and strategies that we hope will help you create a burnout-free 2024. So with that, once again, thank you, everyone. And come find us on LinkedIn. We all hang out on LinkedIn. That's the best way to be in touch with us. And also, we'd love to for you to share this further and bring a friend or two, and you come back and join us in December. With that, Tiffany and Sally, any final thoughts before we close out?
Just gratitude for the conversation. For those who joined live and on replay, we hope to see you on December 2nd. Please, as Meenakshi shared, please share with a friend so that we can all impact burnout together. And again, just many thanks to you, Sally, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.
It's just a real delight to be with you. Thank you for having me, Glenn.
Take care.
Take care. Be well, everyone. Bye.
Bye.